one and I stand on that. You and me, babe, that's black on black.
We're in this is again, I've been saying this is history right now. We're living through it. Here's yet another touchstone that will be circled 100 years from now as something happened that was not good, that was a problem. And we talked a little bit about it with Don Calloway and Rachel Bittercoffer yesterday. This is not going to bode well. And I think if Trump were in office, I don't know if this would go any differently, except I think the perception would be different. And this is what's strange. Like, if Trump was for bombing the hell out of people, I feel like there was capacity in this country to be okay with that. And I only know because I watched January 6th and there was not a whole lot of, I didn't see I didn't even see the military come out to stop it. I didn't see anyone stop that. Yeah. Except for a handful of congressional officers, one of whom got killed and a couple others brutalized. I don't know, Dr. Mitchell, like, where are we?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always say is that decency is not an American inheritance. It takes actual effort. And part of what has been heartbreaking for me in this whole thing is watching people who do care about humanity operate as if they think that decency is a foregone conclusion, so that they can simply throw their hands up when the decent thing isn't immediately done when we pressure our representatives. So, in other words, the United States, whether we're talking about under Barack Obama or anybody else, the United States has always been on the side of protecting Israel and funding, more importantly, funding Israel, even though the research is very clear that a lot of the killing mechanisms and technologies for surveillance are perfected in Israel in oppressing the Gazan people. So a lot of the surveillance technology the United States uses is perfected in Gaza as Israel brutalizes Gazan and Palestinian people. So what I want us to understand is, if decency is not an American inheritance, then what that means is that there's no reason to be surprised that you would have to pressure Biden to put pressure on Israel for a ceasefire. There's no surprise in that. So there's no reason for us to act as if, oh, well, I'm not going to vote for him if because of what's happening. It's like, no, the United States has always had this policy of supporting what has always been brutal oppression of Palestinians. This is not new. So if we understand that decency is not an American inheritance that we actually have to fight for, then that should be even more incentive for us to pressure the people who can be pressured, which are people like Biden and Harris and Democrats. And what you're saying about Trump is important, because the truth is Americans don't have any freaking standards for Republicans, because Republicans are clearly about showing that they don't actually care, but they get away with it constantly because so-called decent people are never thinking that they should hold them to an actual standard. It's always the people who actually want to do something toward listening to the people. They're the ones who get thrown under the bus every time I turn around.
It's almost like, I think about the prodigal son in the Bible, but I also think about those of us in the family that always did the right thing, and you have a sibling that never did right. But as soon as that, so it's like, hey, wait a minute. How come this person gets to get away with it? Y'all not, but I got to do, and I feel like there's something inherently wrong with lowering the standards because somebody is already in their nature of shown to be brutal. So if they do one act of kindness, we're like, oh, what a great person.
Yeah. What the thing that I'm trying to say is that let's pay attention to how much we don't have standards for Republicans. And part of the reason that that happens, let's be clear, is that dominant discourse and practice goes along with Republicans. In other words, we have a racist, sexist, classist society that says the poor are poor because they deserve it. And even if I'm giving the rich tax breaks, they deserve it. Like, that is built into the American way. So what I need us to notice is that the GOP and Republicans simply go along with what is already the dominant discourse, which is inherently unequal, racist, sexist, classist, etc. This is why they don't actually have to come up to a standard, because everything they do is already going with the flow of the racism of American culture, the sexism of American culture, the classism of American culture. So if we can recognize that, I think that we have a better chance of actually recognizing what they're getting away with and why, and how we ourselves let them get away with it, because we're not recognizing that it is the people who want to have a less racist, less sexist, less classist society that are doing the uphill battle all the time. So every time they get a little progress, let's not be a part of slapping back that progress.
Right.
And acting as if they are, yeah.
And they're masterful with the narrative, right? So our deepest fears is somebody's going to come and take what's mine. So here come the immigrants. You know, our deepest fears that somehow my value system is going to be challenged by all of these. You know, this country's flooded with all of these fill in the blanks. And I don't want these fill in the blanks around my children, because I want my children, and everyone should want their children to have the values that you want. I get it. That's why people run to Utah and all these places, run to the hills, so you can be away from those so-called so-and-sos. But somehow y'all still, you know, mass shootings are still happening in those places. Somehow, you know, there's all kind of weird. Anchorage, Alaska, one of the most dangerous places in America, is homogenous and white. 866-801-8255. You're saying something right now. Dr. Karetha Mitchell is here, and I don't know how we reconcile it, because even those of us who are listening right now, somebody said, "Oh, you hate conservatives." I was like, I don't even know you. I don't know whether you're, because I don't get involved with these labels. You know what I hate? I hate inhumanity. I hate that. I hate it. I hate the fact that we can't live in a world where we can see all people as human beings. I don't care where they come from.
Okay.
I hate that.
Let me tell you what that has me thinking about, right? Part of what I think has been powerful for my ability to think critically, I'll just use myself as an example. What has been powerful for me in terms of learning how to think critically is that you cannot actually be a critical thinker unless you're willing to think about power differentials. So part of what I can see is that so-called conservatives, you have to ask, what are you conserving? In the United States, what gets conserved is the racism, sexism, heterosexism. That's what gets conserved. Why? This is key. What we have to understand is the way that violence is actually built into the American culture, such that there is violence baked into the privileges I get, Karen, by being read as a cisgender Black woman. The fact that I am considered cisgender, that people assume that I'm cisgender and not transgender, there are all kinds of assumptions that come with that give me a level of credibility that is simply based on the fact that I'm not considered trans in their eyes. I need us to recognize then, when we have all been taught that the person who should have rights is cisgendered, straight, heterosexual, we need to recognize the violence built into that, because what it teaches us is that human beings who should have rights and should have their rights respected come in a very narrow package that is cisgendered and straight. If we can recognize that there's violence built into that, Karen, then what we can recognize is the unearned advantage of simply being read as cisgender, not simply that I can pat myself on the back and be like, oh, well, those trans people are being attacked. Isn't that a shame? And isn't it the case that I'm a good person because I can sympathize with the disadvantage they're facing? No. What happens if I think about my unearned advantage? That's a whole different thing. So to me, Karen, it's about recognizing when we think about this conservative framework, think about what's being conserved, and if we can get real about the violence that's baked into what is being preserved, I think we have more of a shot of more of us getting serious about the fact that we are in a contested battle, and we always have been, toward decency and humanity. The idea that humanity only comes in one form is baked into the violence that we face, and we better get serious about doing something different from that violence.
Come on. Something's required. Freedom isn't free. We're talking with the Dr. Coretha Mitchell. Yes, from slave cabins to the White House, homemade citizenship in African-American culture is one of her books, 866-801-8255. I was planning to save this conversation, but since you brought it up, I'm watching Charles Blow's South to Power. I know he has a book. I haven't read it. But I watch a lot of TV. So I've just started Black Cake 2. Those of you recommending it, good job. Chef's kiss to y'all, Black Cake. And now I'm like, oh, that was a book. So I'm like, should I read the book? Should I go back and read the book, best-selling book, or should I watch the series? The series is so delicious. But anyway, so I guess it's Black Cake. But that said, Charles Blow has the South to Power and the notion of reverse, migration. Okay. These states that Black people fled because of white terrorism, because of domestic terrorism, because of lynchings and horrors and stealing of land and not being able to make a living, Black folk left Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, South Carolina, for Detroit, Chicago, LA, from Texas, and Newark, New Jersey, all of those, Newark, New York, DC, etc. Fled, even though DC is technically in the South. Mm-hmm. His contention is, had those Black people stayed there, the power base politically would be in the Black hands, because though, particularly South Carolina, blackest states, Mississippi, blackest states, Texas is one that has the most gathering of Black people of any state in our union, not per capita, but sheer numbers. So what if we move back with intention? And so he actually starts off the documentary talking about the very thing that you're just saying. He said, white people watching Black people brutalize dogs, lynchings and stuff, watching it on television, it was too much. It had to stop. But it didn't mean that they wanted equality with Black people. It's sort of like I could watch a dog being brutalized and be very, very upset. And so most of y'all, not maybe y'all, but you know who I'm talking about, really care more about animals being brutalized than they do about people. But that said, he said, but that doesn't mean that dog is equal to me. I don't think the dog is equal, even though I don't want to see it brutalized. And that's how America has dealt with the inequality in this country. They don't want equality. They may not want the brutality. Watching George Floyd be murdered was a lot for a lot of people globally. Mm-hmm. But just 2 years afterwards, the window of sympathy closed. And we got now affirmative action overturned and a whole bunch of things, Fearless Fund, and a lot of companies are being sued for even wanting the thought of equality within corporate America. Yeah. So it's clear to me that what you're saying is absolutely true, and it goes across the board. And even many of us share those same values with people who come here, don't speak English. You know who you are. They don't even speak English. You don't look at them as equals or human beings if they're driving your cab or washing, doing domestic work or washing dishes or whatever. You don't see them as equal or worthy of value. You don't want them to be brutalized, but you don't also want them living next door to you. 866-801-8255. First, we got to deal with it in ourselves, how we look at people who come to this country who don't fit, the description that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And, again, for me, that is the reason why I'm always encouraging people to not do what this country encourages them to do, which is either I ignore inequity altogether, or when I notice that there's some inequity, I want to focus on somebody else's disadvantage rather than my unearned advantage. Because if I focus on their disadvantage, I can feel real good about myself, pat myself on the back for noticing that they were facing some stuff that wasn't fair. But if I flip it and say, wait a second, what are my unearned advantages? I have to get much more creative about how I create opportunity for other people. In other words, if I see that it's my unearned advantage that got me to the position that I'm in, then I might get a little bit more creative about creating more space for the space that I'm in for people who didn't have that unearned advantage. But the other thing that you have me thinking about, especially with the affirmative action example, is watching all of that unfold with these lawsuits, these industries that have a minuscule number of people of color, but you still going to sue to make sure that there's absolutely no opportunity. I mean, even the McNair program is under attack right now. It confirms for me, Karen, why it has been so important for me for more than a decade to beat the drum of not talking about my disadvantage as a Black person, but talking about the unearned advantage that comes with being white in this country. That's why it's been so important for me to talk about white mediocrity. Not being able to talk about that and shielding the work that whiteness gets to do whenever it's not marked, that is something I've never invested in. And I feel like if more of us had been beating that drum about marking the unearned advantage of whiteness, it would have been harder for these suits to take place in the way that they have, because more people would be versed in recognizing, no, we're not just talking about race when I show up. We're talking about race when everybody in the room is white. And why is it that everybody's white? Is it because they're the best and brightest? Absolutely not. That has never been the case in this country. So that's the other thing you have me thinking about when I think about unearned advantage, and how I want to encourage other people to think about theirs. And that means I have to think about mine too.
Amen.